By the time Clara Hartwell reached Blackmere Hall, rain had soaked through her gloves and turned the road behind her into black mud. The carriage had scarcely stopped when a footman informed her that His Grace had been waiting 17 minutes. Clara stepped beneath the portico, with her portfolio pressed to her chest. She was led past portraits of unsmiling Harcourt ancestors into a library where a tall man stood before the fire. "Miss Hartwell," he said without turning, "you are late. The North Road is half under water, Your Grace. I am aware of the weather. Then you will understand why I could not persuade it to clear the way." He turned at last. Julian Harcourt, Duke of Blackmere, looked about 37, with dark hair touched by silver and a face made severe by long practice in concealing emotion. His gaze was direct enough to make most people lower their eyes. Clara did not. A spark of curiosity crossed his expression before vanishing. "You were recommended as a botanical painter. I was summoned without being told what I am to paint. My wife's garden." The room seemed to contract around the words. Clara knew he had been widowed 7 years earlier. Beyond that, every account of the late Duchess ended in rumor. Julian opened the door. "Come." He led her through a covered walk to a walled garden drowned in rain. Dead roses sagged from rusted frames. Hedges had grown wild. A dry marble fountain stood beneath rotting leaves. At the far end stood an ivy-covered glasshouse. "This was hers?" Clara asked. "Yes, you wish me to paint it as it was." "As it is," she studied him. "You want 12 paintings of neglect. I want a faithful record, of ruin, of truth." Clara crossed the wet gravel. Beneath the decay, she could still see the garden's design. Curved beds around the fountain, a path to the glasshouse, white rose roots planted where morning light would once have reached them first. "This is not the whole truth," she said. Julian followed several paces behind. "You have been here less than 5 minutes, and I can already see that someone loved this place. If I paint only what remains, I record what time has done to it, not what your wife made of it. You were not employed to imagine her. No artist can paint a garden without imagining the hands that shaped it." For one instant, pain moved through his eyes. Then his expression closed again. "You will paint what stands before you," he said. "No restoration, no flattering invention. No flowers added, because emptiness makes you uncomfortable. And if I refuse, you will be paid for the journey and returned to London." Clara thought of her sister Lydia, the unpaid coal bill, and the landlord's final notice hidden beneath her sketch papers. She could not afford pride, but neither could she surrender her judgment. "I will begin with the glasshouse. It has been locked since my wife's death. Then it belongs in the record." After a pause, Julian placed an iron key in her palm without touching her. "Do not disturb anything." The lock opened with a harsh cry. Inside, the air smelled of damp earth and decaying wood. Long tables stood beneath dusty panes. Clay pots lay overturned. At the rear, an easel faced the wall, as though its owner had stepped away in the middle of a thought. Julian remained by the door while Clara moved between the tables. Beneath the easel, partly covered by fallen canvas, she noticed a blue leather book. "There is something here," she said. "Leave it." But she had already lifted the canvas. The sketchbook was swollen with damp. Its first pages showed roses, pear branches, and the glasshouse in better years. The drawings were delicate but certain, made by someone who had known every leaf. Then Clara turned the page. Her breath stopped. A woman's face looked back at her, the same broad brow, the same deep-set eyes, the same small scar beside the left eyebrow that Clara had carried since childhood. She turned another page, her face in profile. Her face bent over a book, her face asleep beside a window. Dates were written beneath the sketches. Bath 1810, 8 years earlier. Clara heard Julian cross the floor behind her. His shadow fell over the open book. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the Duke asked, in a voice so controlled it was almost cold, "Why did my wife draw your face before either of us knew your name?" Clara stared at the open page until the lines seemed to shift beneath the grey light. "I cannot answer you," she said. Julian reached past her and took the sketchbook, careful not to touch her hand. His gaze moved from the drawing to Clara's face and back again. Whatever shock he felt did not alter his posture, but the fingers holding the damp leather tightened. "My wife made these sketches," he said. "I recognize her hand. I did not accuse her of stealing another artist's work." "You deny knowing her?" "I deny knowing the Duchess of Blackmere. That is not the same answer." Clara looked again at the dates beneath the portraits. Bath, 1810. A narrow rented room with pale walls returned to her memory, followed by the scent of lavender water and the quiet voice of a woman who had never given her true name. "There was someone," she admitted. "A lady I met in Bath." Julian's expression hardened. "Her name?" She called herself Mrs. Vale. The name struck him more visibly than the sketches had done. He closed the book. "Vale was my wife's mother's family name." Clara's breath caught. "She never told me." "What did she tell you?" "Very little. She was staying at a private house outside the city. I was 19 and earning money by teaching drawing to ladies who did not wish to attend public lessons. The owner asked me to visit her twice a week. For how long? Perhaps 6 weeks. And you expect me to believe that in 6 weeks you never learned whom you were teaching? She was ill, Your Grace. She did not receive visitors. She did not speak of society. I had no reason to imagine she was a duchess. You had every reason to notice that she could afford private rooms and servants." "One servant," Clara replied, "and the gowns she wore had been altered more than once. Whatever wealth she possessed, she did not display it." Julian walked toward the glass-house door, carrying the sketchbook as if it had become evidence in a trial. Rain tapped against the roof above them. "What did she ask you to teach?" "Watercolor at first, then portraiture." "Your portrait?" "I did not pose formally. She sketched while I read to her or prepared the paints. I did not know she had kept so many." "You never wondered why she studied your face?" Clara remembered Mrs. Vale watching her across the small room, not with envy or calculation, but with a sadness too old for her delicate features. She once said, "I looked as though I still believed my life could change." Julian turned away. The silence that followed was more painful than anger. Clara understood then that the woman in Bath had not been speaking merely of illness. She had been speaking of a life she believed already ended. "What happened to her?" Julian asked. "One morning I arrived, and the housekeeper told me Mrs. Vale had gone. Gone where? She would not say. I was paid for the remaining lessons and told not to return. And you made no inquiry." "I did. No one answered me." Julian looked back at her. "My wife died near Bath 3 days after the last date in this book." Clara felt the cold of the glasshouse settle beneath her skin. "I did not know. You knew enough to remember her. I remembered a lonely woman who disliked roses painted red because she said people always made them brighter than they truly were. I remembered that she could not climb the stairs without resting. I remembered that she waited for letters which never came. None of those things told me she was your wife." His eyes sharpened. "Letters from whom she did not say. Did she speak of me? Not by name, but she spoke of a husband." Clara hesitated. Julian noticed. "What did she say? That she had disappointed him?" The Duke's face became unreadable. Clara regretted the words as soon as she spoke them, but withdrawing them would have been more cruel. She believed he would be better without her. She was mistaken. The answer came quietly, with such certainty that Clara could no longer see only an arrogant nobleman preserving a dead garden. She saw a husband who had spent 7 years arguing with a woman who could no longer hear him. Footsteps sounded on the gravel outside. An elderly man in a dark coat appeared at the entrance, sheltering beneath a servant's umbrella. "Your Grace," he said. "Mr. Wren has arrived from London." Julian did not take his eyes from Clara. "Send him to the library." The man bowed and withdrew. "Who is Mr. Wren?" Clara asked. "My family solicitor." Julian closed the sketchbook beneath his arm. "You will come with me. I have not agreed to be interrogated by a lawyer. You may leave Blackmere whenever you wish." Clara followed him out into the rain. "You know perfectly well that is not freedom when you have withheld the reason I was summoned." For the first time, Julian stopped. "I did not summon you, Miss Hartwell." The words silenced her. "My secretary sent the letter because your name appeared in a sealed instruction attached to my wife's will." The library fire had burned lower by the time they entered. Mr. Wren stood beside a table covered with documents. He was a thin man with silver spectacles and an anxious habit of pressing his lips together before speaking. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I had hoped this matter might be explained without distress." "That hope appears to have failed," Clara replied. Julian placed the blue sketchbook beside the documents. Mr. Wren's face lost its remaining color. "You knew of this?" Julian asked. "Not of the book, Your Grace, but you knew her name." Mr. Wren opened a folded parchment. The late Duchess added a private codicil to her will shortly before her death. It instructed that, 7 years afterward, Miss Clara Hartwell was to be invited to Blackmere to complete 12 paintings of the memorial garden. Clara stared at him. "Why 7 years? No explanation was provided." "And if I refuse?" Mr. Wren glanced toward Julian before answering. "A sum of £12,000, currently held in trust, is intended to establish a convalescent home for women without independent means. The funds are released only after the paintings are completed, before the first day of spring. And if they are not, they return to the Harcourt estate." Clara looked at Julian. "Did you know this?" "Not until this morning." The solicitor continued, "There is one additional sentence." He lifted the parchment and read, "Miss Hartwell will recognize the garden before she recognizes me." The room fell silent. Clara moved toward the sketchbook. On the page facing her portrait, Eleanor had drawn a small oval brooch pinned beneath the model's collar. Clara raised one hand slowly to her throat. The brooch was no longer there, but she remembered its blue enamel surface, the tiny white pear blossom at its center, and the trembling fingers that had fastened it to her dress on the last afternoon in Bath. Mrs. Vale had given it to her. Clara looked at Julian. "I did know your wife," she whispered. "I simply did not know her name." By morning, the rain had weakened to a silver mist, but Clara's certainty had not improved with the weather. She had known Eleanor Harcourt. She had sat beside her, mixed her paints, and listened, while she spoke of letters that never arrived. Yet Clara had left Bath, believing Mrs. Vale had merely moved to another house. All the while, the woman had been dying beneath a borrowed name. At breakfast, a maid delivered Clara's drawing materials and informed her that His Grace had ordered a work table placed inside the glass house. Clara found more than a table waiting for her. A canvas awning had been stretched beneath the worst cracks in the roof. A small iron stove stood near the easel, already burning. Fresh boards covered the dampest section of floor, and a pot of tea rested beside a stack of clean cloths. Julian was nowhere in sight. "His Grace gave the instructions before dawn," said the maid when Clara asked. "He said the paintings would be of little value if the artist lost the use of her hands." The words were practical enough to conceal kindness. Clara suspected that was precisely why he had chosen them. She began with the fountain. Rather than paint immediately, she studied the paths and made small sketches of the garden's structure. The central beds had once formed the shape of an 8-pointed star. Pear trees lined the eastern wall, while white roses had been trained around a stone seat, now almost hidden beneath ivy. "You are altering it already." The voice behind her was female, controlled and unmistakably displeased. Clara turned. The woman standing at the glass-house entrance wore black silk, without a trace of morning softness. Her silver hair was arranged perfectly beneath a lace cap, and the Harcourt features appeared in her face, sharpened by age. The straight nose, the steady eyes, the refusal to reveal uncertainty. "Your Grace," Clara said, "Beatrice Harcourt, Dowager Duchess of Blackmere, entered without invitation. My son instructed you to record the garden as it stands. I am recording its design before deciding how best to represent it. You have been here one day and already believe you understand what my daughter-in-law intended. No, I believe gardens possess evidence, just as letters do. Beatrice's gaze shifted to the blue sketchbook beside Clara's hand. So Julian showed you. I found it. An unfortunate distinction. Clara closed the book. Did you know Eleanor had drawn me? I knew Eleanor drew many things when she was unwell. The answer was smooth, but it did not reach Beatrice's eyes. She was not confused when I knew her. You knew her for 6 weeks. I knew her for 6 years. Then perhaps you can explain why she used another name. Beatrice walked toward the windows, looking over the ruined beds as though assessing an old enemy. My daughter-in-law was delicate. She found the expectations of her position difficult. After repeated illnesses, she became convinced that everyone at Blackmere judged her. Did they? The Dowager Duchess turned slowly. You would do well to remember that employment in a noble household does not grant permission to question its family. And a title does not change what Eleanor wrote into her own will. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Beatrice smiled, although there was no warmth in it. My son's grief has made him vulnerable to mysteries. Do not mistake that vulnerability for affection. I have made no such mistake. See that you do not. She moved toward the door, then paused. Lady Cecily Vaughan and her mother will arrive next week. An understanding between our families has existed for some time. Blackmere requires a duchess capable of fulfilling her obligations. The meaning was deliberate. Eleanor had failed those obligations. Clara could never be considered for them. When Beatrice had gone, an older woman entered carrying a basket of folded linen. She was broad-shouldered, grey-haired, and dressed more simply than the senior servants Clara had seen inside the house. I am Mrs. Alden, the housekeeper, she said. I serve the late Duchess. Clara waited, uncertain whether another warning was coming. Instead, Mrs. Alden touched the edge of the work table. Her Grace used to sit here in the mornings, even in winter when the panes froze. Did she draw often? More often than she spoke. Clara opened the sketchbook to the pages of flowers. Do you recognize these? Mrs. Alden studied them. The white rose was hers, the pear blossom too, but those were not all planted together. What do you mean? This page shows flowers from different seasons. Some never grew in this garden at all. Clara looked more closely. A white rose, a sprig of acacia, a thistle, a cluster of hyacinth. Each had been drawn beside one of Clara's portraits. Beneath them were tiny marks she had assumed were flaws caused by damp. They were not random marks, they were numbers. Did Eleanor send? Clara carried the copied symbols to the library before dinner. Julian stood at the long table beneath the western windows, reading correspondence by the last grey light. He looked up when she entered, and his gaze moved immediately to the page in her hand. You have found something. The flowers form letters. She placed the sheet before him and explained the sequence. White rose, acacia, thistle, hyacinth, bath, Julian said. It may be only the first word. He opened Eleanor's sketchbook beside Clara's notes. Together they examined every flower, number, and mark. Some pages produced nothing. Others yielded fragments that made no sense, until Clara noticed that the dates beneath the portraits determined the order. By the time the lamps were lit, they had assembled a sentence. Bath, blue desk. Beneath the false drawer, Julian's expression changed. What is it? Clara asked. My wife had a blue writing desk in the glass house. I saw no desk. It was moved after her death. Where? His gaze shifted toward the dark corridor beyond the library. The West Gallery. The desk stood beneath a row of ancestral portraits, half concealed by a Holland cover. Its blue paint had faded to grey at the edges, but small white pear blossoms were still visible around the keyhole. Julian dismissed the footman who had followed them. You expect to move it yourself? Clara asked. I expect not to have half the household discussing why we are searching my dead wife's furniture. He pulled the desk away from the wall. Clara knelt beside the lower drawer and ran her fingertips along its underside. There, a thin wooden panel gave way beneath the pressure of her thumb. Behind it lay a narrow compartment. Julian crouched beside her. Their shoulders nearly touched, but neither moved away. Inside the compartment were 6 empty envelopes, tied with a ribbon. Every one had been opened carefully along the upper edge. Clara lifted the first. The address had been written in Eleanor's hand. His Grace the Duke of Blackmere. "These were meant for you," she said. Julian took the envelope. His face remained still, but the silence around him seemed to deepen. "They are empty. Someone removed the letters and returned the covers. Why preserve the envelopes? To make Eleanor believe they had been sent, or to prove later that they had existed." Julian examined each seal. All bore the same broken impression, a small bird above the Harcourt crest. "I do not recognize this mark." Clara pointed to the final envelope. "There is writing inside. A single line had been added in pencil. He must never know what you have cost him." The handwriting was not Eleanor's. Julian rose so abruptly that the desk trembled. "Who had access to her rooms?" Clara asked. "My mother, the household secretary, Mrs. Alden, several maids, and Mr. Bell." His eyes narrowed. "He handled all private correspondence. Then begin with him. He died 3 years ago." "That is convenient." Julian looked at her sharply. "For someone," Clara added. A sudden crack of thunder shook the gallery. Rain struck the windows with renewed force, and somewhere in the house a door slammed. Mrs. Alden appeared at the end of the passage carrying a lamp. "Your Grace, the wind has broken one of the glass-house panes." Julian covered the envelopes with his coat. "Have the servants secure the doors. Miss Hartwell's canvases must be removed." "I will do it," Clara said. "The storm is worsening, and the first painting is still inside." Julian muttered something beneath his breath and followed her. By the time they reached the garden, rain was blowing sideways across the paths. The glass-house door had twisted against its frame. Julian forced it open, and they entered just as another pane shattered above the eastern wall. Clara rushed to the work table. Julian pulled a heavy canvas over her unfinished painting while she gathered the sketchbook and loose pages. The door slammed shut behind them. Julian tried the handle. It would not move. "The frame has swollen," he said. "Can it be forced? Not without breaking the glass around it." Another gust shook the structure. Clara carried the papers to the stove, where the fire had nearly died. Julian added coal and knelt to shield the flame until it strengthened. "You should not have come after the painting," he said. "You came after me. That does not make your decision sensible, nor yours." He looked up, rain running from his hair onto his collar. For one unexpected moment, Clara laughed. Julian stared at her as though no one had ever laughed while disobeying him. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth moved. The expression vanished, almost at once, but she had seen it. They sat on opposite sides of the stove, while the storm closed around them. With the door jammed, and the servants unable to hear through the rain, there was nothing to do but wait. Clara turned one of the empty envelopes between her fingers. "Mrs. Vale once told me that a duke could not afford to love a broken wife." Julian's hand tightened around the iron poker. "She said that?" "Yes, when, near the end, she had been waiting for a letter all morning. When none came, she asked me whether duty could erase affection." "What did you tell her?" "That love which disappears under pressure was probably obedience wearing a more attractive face." Julian looked into the fire. "You were 19. I was opinionated at 19. You remain so. And was I wrong?" He did not answer immediately. "My mother told me Eleanor had gone willingly," he said at last. "She said Eleanor could not bear another winter at Blackmere and did not wish me to follow." "Did you believe her?" "I believed Eleanor was ill and ashamed of it. I believed she needed time." "Did you search for her?" "I went to London first, then Brighton, York, and every estate belonging to her family. By the time I learned she had been in Bath, she had already been buried. The final words were almost soundless. Clara had imagined his grief before, but imagination had softened it. There was nothing soft in the knowledge that a man had crossed half the country while his wife waited in one room for a letter that someone had stolen. "She believed you had abandoned her," Clara said, "and I believed she had forbidden me to come." The wind rattled the glass. Julian set the poker aside. There were no letters at Blackmere. Not one. Clara looked at the empty envelopes near the stove. "Then someone made certain neither of you heard the truth." A violent gust shook the roof. Clara instinctively reached for the sketchbook, and Julian reached for her hand. His fingers closed around hers. Neither spoke. The touch lasted only a moment before he released her, but the warmth remained after his hand was gone. At dawn, the storm weakened enough for the servants to force open the door. Julian and Clara returned to the house with the envelopes hidden inside his coat. Beatrice was waiting beside the library fire. She stood perfectly composed, although no servant had announced their return. In one hand she held a sealed envelope bearing Eleanor's handwriting. In the other she held a candle. "So," the Dowager Duchess said, "you have begun opening graves that ought to have remained closed." Julian crossed the library before Beatrice could lower the envelope into the flame. "Give it to me." His mother did not move. "You have spent 7 years grieving a woman who no longer exists. Must you now permit a stranger to teach you how to grieve her again? The letter." Beatrice looked at Clara instead. "This is what you wanted, is it not? A wounded duke, an unfinished scandal, and a dead woman who cannot contradict you." Clara held her ground. "If the letter contains nothing, there is no reason to destroy it." For the first time, Beatrice's composure fractured. She touched the corner of the envelope to the candle. Julian caught her wrist, but the paper had already taken flame. He released her only to seize the burning letter and strike it against the hearthstone. The wax seal melted beneath his fingers. When he opened what remained, the center of the page had blackened beyond recognition. Only a few lines survived near the bottom. "I have waited every day. Tell him I did not leave because I ceased." The rest crumbled as Julian touched it. He stood before the fire with ash on his hand. Beatrice's face had gone pale, but her voice remained controlled. It was the writing of a distressed woman, nothing more. It was addressed to me. She wrote many letters she later regretted. "And you decided which ones I was permitted to read. I decided what was necessary to preserve this family." Julian looked at her then, and Clara saw something colder than anger enter his expression. "Leave us." Beatrice straightened. "You will regret allowing grief to turn you against your own blood." "My wife was my blood before she died." The Dowager Duchess departed without another word. For several moments, Julian did not move. Clara wanted to speak, but anything she offered would have sounded small beside the ruined letter. At last, he placed the surviving fragment inside Eleanor's sketchbook. "You should rest," Clara said. "I have rested for 7 years. That is not what I meant." "No," his gaze settled on her. "It rarely is." The following days passed beneath a silence that spread through Blackmere Hall more efficiently than gossip. Julian questioned servants and searched old account books. Beatrice remained in her rooms. Clara returned to the garden, though she often felt the house watching through every window. Then Lady Cecily Vaughan arrived with her mother and 12 additional guests. The dinner was presented as an ordinary autumn gathering, but every place setting had been chosen with the care of a political negotiation. Lady Cecily sat at Julian's right. Clara was placed at the far end of the table between an elderly clergyman and a gentleman who spoke only of horses. She might have disappeared into the arrangement had Lady Marwood not examined the faint blue paint beneath Clara's fingernails. "How industrious," the woman said. "I have always admired those who earn their supper with their hands." The nearby conversation quieted. Clara set down her fork. Then I am fortunate to possess two of them. A few guests concealed smiles. Lady Marwood did not. One hears that female artists are becoming quite bold, though I cannot imagine what gentleman would display a painting. After learning the creator had climbed ladders and carried her own equipment. Before Clara could answer, Julian spoke from the opposite end of the table. I intend to display 12. Every face turned toward him. Lady Marwood laughed lightly. Your Grace is generous. No. Miss Hartwell is talented. The room became still. Julian lifted his wineglass but did not drink. You will apologize. The woman's smile vanished. I beg your pardon. To Miss Hartwell. Beatrice, seated farther down the table, tightened one hand around her napkin. Lady Marwood looked as though she had been asked to apologize to the silverware. I meant no offense. Then the apology should cost you very little. Clara watched the struggle between rank and humiliation pass across the woman's face. My apologies, Miss Hartwell. Accepted. Julian turned to the servant behind Clara. Move Miss Hartwell's place beside Lady Cecily. Beatrice's eyes met his across the candles. The chair was moved. Clara took her new seat without allowing her hands to tremble. Lady Cecily Vaughan was not what Clara had expected. She was elegant, fair-haired and observant, with none of Beatrice's severity. During the next course, she leaned closer. You need not fear me, Cecily murmured. I was not aware I did. Then you are either brave or poorly informed. Which would you prefer? Cecily smiled, brave. It is rarer. After dinner, musicians were summoned to the ballroom. Clara intended to remain near the windows, but Julian crossed the room and stopped before her. Dance with me. It was not phrased as a request. Clara looked at the hand he offered. You have a remarkable talent for making invitations sound like legal orders. Would you prefer flowers? I would prefer choice. Something softened in his eyes. Then choose. The room was watching. Beatrice was watching most of all. Clara placed her hand in his. The first turn brought them too close for indifference. Julian's hand rested at her waist with perfect formality. Yet Clara felt the restraint in every movement. You did not have to defend me, she said. Yes, I did. Because I am employed by you? Because she was wrong. That has never prevented society from speaking. It will prevent society from speaking in my house. His gaze held hers. For one dangerous moment, the music and the guests seemed to recede. Then a young man named Lord Ashcombe approached when the dance ended and asked whether Clara might consider painting at his family's estate in London. Before Clara could reply, Julian said, Miss Hartwell's commission at Blackmere continues until spring. Ashcombe smiled. I asked what she might consider afterward. Julian's expression did not change. Then, you should permit her to finish the work before planning her departure. The young man bowed and moved away. Clara looked at Julian. Was that concern for my schedule? It was an observation. It sounded remarkably like jealousy. You overestimate the entertainment offered by this evening, and you underestimate your own face. She left him before he could answer. In the retiring room, Clara pressed one hand against the dressing table as a sudden pain tightened beneath her ribs. She covered her mouth with her handkerchief and waited until the coughing passed. When she lowered the linen, a small red stain marked the center. Lady Cecily stood in the doorway. Clara closed her hand around the cloth. Cecily entered and shut the door behind her. I will not tell him, she said quietly. There is nothing to tell. There is blood. Clara turned away. It is the weather. No physician would agree. Cecily's voice held no triumph, only concern. She moved closer and studied Clara's pale reflection in the mirror. Does he know, she asked, that you may not live long enough to finish the garden? Clara folded the stained handkerchief before Lady Cecily could look at it again. You are mistaken. I am not. Cecily's tone remained gentle, which made denial more difficult. Clara turned from the mirror. His Grace has already buried one wife. I will not place another illness before him while he is still learning what was taken from the first. You believe silence will spare him. I believe truth has a cost. So does concealment. The words struck too near the wound. Clara had spent days uncovering. Cecily seemed to realize it. Forgive me. That was unkind. It was accurate. Outside the retiring room, the music continued as though no private ruin had occurred. Clara pressed the handkerchief into her sleeve. "How long have you known?" Cecily asked. "Since summer." "And the physician?" He spoke carefully, which is how physicians speak when they possess no hopeful answer. Cecily lowered her voice. "Does your sister know?" "No. Then you carry every burden alone. I carry the burdens that belong to me. No burden belongs only to one person once it begins changing the lives around it." Clara did not reply. Cecily opened the door, then paused. "I meant what I said. I will not tell him. But secrets have a way of choosing their own moment." The next morning, Clara returned to the glass house before the household had risen. She opened Eleanor's sketchbook to the page that had troubled her since Bath was revealed. It showed Clara standing beneath a pear tree in full blossom. The drawing could not have been made from life. Eleanor had never seen Clara at Blackmere, and Clara had never entered the garden before this autumn. Yet every detail was precise. The stone seat, the eastern wall, the twisted trunk of the pear tree, only the figure was different. Clara had been placed there as though Eleanor had imagined her inside the garden, years before anyone summoned her. She held the page nearer the window. A faint line of writing appeared beneath the lower edge, nearly hidden beneath water damage. Vale House, St. Catherine's Road, Bath. Clara copied the address. When Julian entered, she was still studying the page. "You left the ballroom early," he said. "I was tired. You were pale. So were half the guests. Candlelight is unkind." His gaze lingered on her face, but he did not press. Clara turned the sketchbook toward him. "I found an address." He read it once. "Vale House," he said. "That cannot be accidental. It was the name Eleanor used." "And the place where she died?" "I believe so." Julian rang for his secretary and ordered inquiries sent to Bath. Then he looked again at the drawing. "Why did she place you beneath that tree?" "I do not know." "You must remember something." Clara closed the book. "You ask questions as though memory were a locked room and I had only misplaced the key. And you answer as though every truth must first be judged safe for me." The accusation landed more sharply than he intended. Clara looked away. Julian noticed. "What are you not telling me?" She thought of blood on white linen, of Cecily's warning, of Eleanor waiting for letters while illness narrowed her world. "Mrs. Vale spoke of you," Clara said instead. His expression tightened. "She never used your name. But she spoke of a husband who had chosen his family over her. That was not true. She believed it was." "What else?" Clara moved toward the cold stove. "On my final visit, she asked whether a man could love a woman after she had failed him." Julian's voice dropped. Failed him how? She had lost children. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara turned. Julian stood rigid beside the work table. "My mother told me there had been one," he said. "There were 3. His face changed. Eleanor believed each loss made her less worthy of returning to Blackmere. She said the estate needed an heir more than it needed her. Julian looked toward the ruined garden. "She never told me. Perhaps she tried." He opened the drawer beneath the table and removed the surviving fragment of the burned letter. "I have waited every day. Tell him I did not leave because I ceased." His thumb rested beside the broken line. "I thought she had chosen silence," he said. "And she thought you had." He laughed once, without humor. How efficiently we obeyed the lie. Clara crossed the space between them. "She did not stop loving you." His eyes lifted to hers. "You cannot know that. I heard her speak when she believed no one important was listening." Julian's composure faltered. "What did she say?" Clara remembered Eleanor beside the window at Vale House, her hands wrapped around a cup she had been too weak to lift. She said she could forgive you for not coming, but she could not forgive herself for still listening whenever a carriage stopped outside. Julian turned away. For several moments, Clara allowed him the privacy of his grief. Then he said, "Why did you not tell me this sooner? Because grief can make people use truth as a weapon against themselves. And you decided I could not be trusted with my own past. I decided I needed to know whether you wanted Eleanor as she truly was or only as you had preserved her." He faced her again. "You presume a great deal. Yes. And if I ordered you to leave, I would still be right. Something fierce passed between them, not anger alone, but recognition." Julian took one step closer. "You are the only person in this house who speaks to me as though the title were an inconvenience. Sometimes it is." His gaze fell briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. Clara felt the room narrow around them. He raised one hand, as though he might touch her cheek, but stopped before contact. The restraint was more intimate than touch would have been. Then the glass house door opened. Mrs. Alden entered carrying a small iron key. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she said, though her eyes were fixed on Clara. "I found something among the late Duchess's sewing things." She placed the key on the table. "Her Grace sent it to me before she died. She wrote that I must give it only to the woman whose face appeared in the blue book." Clara picked it up. "What does it open?" Julian asked Mrs. Alden hesitated. "A rosewood chest kept in the Dowager Duchess's former bedchamber." Julian's expression hardened. His mother had moved to the eastern wing after Eleanor's death. The old room had remained locked ever since. They crossed the house in silence. Julian opened the chamber with a master key. Dust lay across the furniture, but the rosewood chest stood beneath the window, exactly where Mrs. Alden had described. Clara inserted the small key. The lock turned. Inside lay 6 bundles of letters tied with white ribbon. Every envelope bore Eleanor's handwriting. Every one was addressed to Julian, and not a single seal had been broken. Julian did not touch the letters at first. He stood beside the open chest, as though the room had shifted beneath him, and he no longer trusted the floor. Clara could hear the faint ticking of a clock beneath its dust cover, and the uneven sound of his breathing. 6 bundles, years of words denied to him. At last he lifted the first ribbon. The envelope beneath it was dated 7 years earlier, 3 days after Eleanor had left Blackmere. "My dearest Julian, I was told you. Agreed that I should go." He stopped reading. Clara turned away, offering the only privacy the locked room could provide. Behind her, paper moved softly. One letter opened, then another. When Julian finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual command. "She wrote every week." Clara faced him. The letters lay spread across the chest. Eleanor had described her rooms in Bath, the pear tree outside her window, and the sound of carriage wheels that made her rise each time despite her weakness. She had apologized for the children they had lost. She had begged Julian not to mistake her illness for rejection. In the final weeks, her writing had become unsteady. "I answered her," Julian said. "What?" "I wrote after she left. I sent letters to her mother's estate, to London, to every address my mother gave me." "Did Eleanor receive them?" "There are no replies among these." Clara looked at the unbroken seals. "Then perhaps your letters were stopped as well." His eyes moved toward the door. "My mother kept these in her own room. That proves concealment." "It does not yet prove she acted alone." Julian gathered the letters carefully. "You defend her." "I defend the truth from becoming too convenient. She burned Eleanor's letter before us." "Yes, but the handwriting inside the empty envelopes was not hers, and Mr. Bell handled the post. If you accuse the Dowager Duchess publicly without knowing the full chain, she will claim grief has made you irrational." Julian's expression sharpened. "You have considered this." "I have spent much of my life learning that powerful people survive accusations by making the accuser appear unstable." He studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. It was the first time Clara felt he had accepted her judgment, not as an impertinent opinion, but as counsel. Julian ordered the room sealed and took the letters to his private study. For the following week he questioned servants, examined payments, and wrote to Mr. Bell's surviving relations. Clara returned to the garden. The first 6 paintings now stood along one wall of the glasshouse. The earliest showed ruin exactly as Julian had demanded: bare branches, empty beds and stone darkened by rain. The 6th was different. Clara had painted the garden as Eleanor described it in Bath. White roses climbed the arches. Pear blossoms softened the eastern wall. Sunlight touched the fountain until the water appeared almost silver. No figure stood within the scene. Yet the painting held the impression that someone had just left the path and might return at any moment. Julian found her studying it one afternoon. "That is not the garden before you," he said. "No, you disregarded my instruction." Yes, his gaze remained on the canvas. "Why? Because decay is only one form of truth. You were commissioned to preserve what remains, and Eleanor asked me to recognize the garden. I believe she meant the one she carried with her after she left." Julian moved closer. "You have made it beautiful. She made it beautiful. She abandoned it." Clara turned toward him. "No, she was removed from it." The word struck hard. Julian looked again at the painting. For a long moment, Clara thought he would order it destroyed. Instead, he said, "The roses were whiter." She blinked. "What?" Eleanor disliked the cream variety. She said it looked apologetic. A faint smile touched Clara's mouth. "That sounds like her." Julian walked to the window and looked toward the ruined beds. "The rose near the stone seats survived," he said. "The gardeners wished to remove it, but I would not allow them." "Why?" "She planted it after we lost our first child." Clara followed him into the garden. The bush was little more than grey wood tangled beneath ivy. Julian knelt and pulled away dead leaves. Near the base, one green shoot had emerged. "It is alive," Clara said. "Barely. That is still alive." Together they cleared the soil. Julian removed his gloves, unconcerned by the mud beneath his nails. Clara loosened the roots, while he carried water from the fountain pump. No servants were summoned, no orders were given. For one quiet hour, they worked side by side. When the rose was uncovered, Clara sat upon the stone seat to rest. A tightness had begun beneath her ribs, but she concealed it by bending over her sketchbook. Julian noticed. "You are tired. I have been kneeling in wet soil. You have been pale for days. So has the sky." He did not smile. Clara began sketching the rose shoot. "Did Eleanor ever tell you why she loved this garden?" She said, "Flowers obeyed no family name." That sounds like something a duchess would say when surrounded by people who did. Julian sat beside her, leaving a proper distance between them. "I stopped coming here because I feared forgetting her voice," he said. Clara's pencil paused. "I thought if the garden remained unchanged, memory would remain unchanged with it." "Has it no?" His answer was quiet. "Some mornings I can remember the exact way she said my name. Other days I remember only that I once knew." Clara looked at him. "Memory does not become more faithful because life is punished around it. You think I have punished Blackmere. I think you turned grief into duty because duty was easier to command. And what would you have had me do?" "Continue." The word seemed to anger him. "You say that as though continuing were not a betrayal. Of whom? Of her." Clara closed her sketchbook. "Eleanor did not love you, so that you could spend the rest of your life proving her death mattered." His face tightened. "She mattered whether you suffer or not." The wind moved through the bare branches above them. Julian looked toward the glasshouse, where the restored garden glowed upon Clara's canvas. "You speak as though you understand loneliness." "I understand what it is to postpone one's own life until postponement begins to resemble virtue. Your sister, my father's debts, Lydia's future. Every practical reason a woman is told must come before herself. And what would you choose if those burdens were removed?" Clara's throat tightened. "Time," she thought. She would choose time. Instead, she said, "I would paint under my own name." Julian turned to her. "Your work is signed. My botanical illustrations appear in books beneath the names of gentlemen who commission them. The flowers are mine. The recognition is not." Then the 12 paintings will bear your name. Your mother will object. My mother has objected to nearly every honorable decision I have made this month." Clara laughed softly. Julian's gaze settled upon her with an expression she could not easily read. He lifted one hand. For a moment, Clara believed he would touch the loose strand of hair at her cheek. His fingers stopped before reaching her. The space between them became fragile. Then footsteps sounded on the path. Mrs. Alden approached, carrying a small parcel wrapped in linen. "I found this among the late Duchess's sewing things," she said. "It was stitched beneath the lining. Inside was a narrow silver key, Mrs." Alden looked toward the house before lowering her voice. "There is another compartment in the rosewood chest. Her Grace told me it could not be opened with the first key." Julian rose. They returned to the sealed chamber and fitted the silver key into a hidden lock beneath the chest. A shallow drawer slid forward. Inside lay a folded ledger, a list of payments made to Mr. Bell, and a document bearing Julian's signature. It authorized Eleanor's permanent removal from Blackmere. Julian stared at the page. "I never signed this." Clara examined the ink and the shape of the letters. The signature was perfect, too perfect. Beneath the document lay a note in Beatrice's hand. "He will forgive me when the title is secure." Julian read it once. Then he looked at Clara with the devastation of a man who had finally found the truth and discovered it wore his own name. Julian remained motionless beside the open chest. The forged authorization lay between them, his name written at the bottom in a hand so exact that even he might have believed it genuine had he not known the truth. Clara looked from the document to Beatrice's note. "He will forgive me when the title is secure." "She planned everything," Julian said, "or believed she was preventing disaster." His eyes lifted sharply. "You still search for mercy on her behalf." "No, I search for motive. Without it, we understand only what she did, not how far she may go to defend it." Julian folded the note with careful precision. "She separated Eleanor from me, concealed her letters, and used my signature to make my wife believe I had cast her aside." "Yes, and you speak of understanding, because anger can expose the truth or destroy the evidence. You must decide which you want more." For several seconds, Julian said nothing. Then he placed the forged document inside the ledger and locked everything in the chest. "You are right." The admission seemed to cost him. Clara watched him turn the key. "What will you do?" "Find out who prepared the document. Mr. Bell may be dead, but his accounts remain. Someone paid the physician in Bath. Someone arranged the carriage. Someone knew Eleanor's letters were being intercepted. And your mother, she will not know what we have found." They left the room separately to avoid attracting attention. By evening, Julian had sent Mr. Wren to examine the estate archives. Clara returned to the glass house, but she could not concentrate. The false signature remained in her thoughts. A name could be copied. A seal could be stolen. A person's entire life could be altered by a page they had never seen. She opened Eleanor's sketchbook and studied the final coded drawings. Beneath the portrait of Clara, standing near the pear tree, a line had been pressed so faintly into the paper that it appeared only when held toward the fire. The truth remains with the woman who heard the bells. Clara traced the words. She remembered Bath, the small room at Vale House, Eleanor lying beneath a wool blanket while rain moved against the window and bells. Church bells had sounded through the darkness on Clara's final visit. Not the measured ringing of Sunday worship, but a rapid alarm that had drawn servants into the street. A woman had entered Eleanor's room that night, not Beatrice. Someone younger wearing a grey traveling cloak. Clara closed her eyes, trying to recover the face, but memory gave her only fragments. Damp gloves, a trembling voice, and a silver cross pinned at the throat. The door opened behind her. Julian entered. "You should have returned to the house an hour ago. I found another message." She showed him the line. "The woman who heard the bells," he read. "Who was she?" "I do not know. Someone came to Vale House on the last night I saw Eleanor. Why have you never mentioned her? Because, until this moment, I had forgotten. His expression hardened. Convenient. Clara stared at him. What did you say? Julian looked away, but the word had already settled between them. My mother claims you knew who Eleanor was before you came here. And you believe her? I believe you have remembered each piece, only after evidence forced it from you. Clara felt something inside her close. I was 19. I knew a sick woman for 6 weeks beneath a false name. You recognized the brooch after seeing it in the sketchbook. You remembered the letters after you asked what she said. And now, when we require another witness, you suddenly remember one. Clara stepped back from him. You think I invented her? I think I no longer know what you knew when you arrived. The accusation was controlled, but no restraint could lessen it. Then ask what you truly wish to ask. Julian's jaw tightened. Did you come to Blackmere knowing Eleanor had chosen you? Clara stared at him. Chosen me for what? To complete her work, to expose my family, to become indispensable to me. The pain came so quickly that for a moment she could not speak. At last she said, You believe I planned your grief. I believe my wife placed your face in her private book and arranged for you to enter my house 7 years after her death. I would be a fool not to question why. And would you also be a fool to question what you feel when you look at me? He did not answer. That silence wounded more deeply than any accusation. Clara closed the sketchbook. Your mother told me you hired me because I resembled Eleanor. That is not true, is it not? No. Then tell me what is. Julian took one step toward her, but stopped. Clara saw the conflict in his face. Desire, guilt, suspicion, and grief were bound so tightly together that perhaps even he could no longer separate them. You look at me, she said, as though I am both a woman and a message from the dead. That is not fair, no, it is not. She lifted the sketchbook and placed it in his hands. I will finish the 6th painting. You may find another artist for the remaining ones. You cannot leave. The trust, the money will return to your estate, and the convalescent home will be lost. That consequence belongs to Eleanor's family now. His voice lowered. Your own family depends on this commission. Clara's fingers tightened. You know very well that is the cruelest argument you could make. Regret entered his expression, but she did not allow him time to use it. I will accept payment only for the work already completed, nothing more. Clara. It was the first time he had spoken her name without formality. She almost stayed because of it. Almost. But Eleanor had waited for a man who never came because silence had been mistaken for truth. Clara would not repeat the same destruction by remaining where trust had already failed. She walked past Julian and left the glass house. Before dawn, her belongings were packed. Lady Cecily found her in the entrance hall, fastening her cloak with unsteady fingers. You are leaving, yes. Does Julian know? He knows enough. Cecily studied her pale face. And your illness? He knows nothing. You cannot travel alone. I have done most things alone, Mrs. Alden appeared with a basket of food and tears she refused to permit herself to shed. Clara embraced her briefly, then entered the waiting carriage. As the horses began to move, she looked back once. Julian stood at an upper window of Blackmere Hall. Even at that distance, Clara knew he was watching her. He did not raise a hand. He did not order the carriage to stop. And Clara understood that whatever had begun between them had been defeated not by Eleanor's death, nor by Beatrice's lies, but by one moment in which Julian had chosen suspicion when love required courage. Blackmere did not become quieter after Clara left. It became empty. Julian noticed it first in the glass house, where the stove had gone cold and 6 unfinished canvases stood beneath linen covers. Her pencils remained in a jar beside the window. A cup still bore the faint blue mark of paint where her thumb had rested. Nothing in the room belonged to him, yet everything accused him. He had doubted her because doubt was familiar. Suspicion demanded nothing except distance. Trust required surrender, and Julian had spent 7 years mistaking control for safety. Now Clara was gone, and control had given him precisely what it had always promised. Silence. He removed the linen from the 6th painting. Eleanor's garden appeared before him, in white roses and spring light. Clara had painted no grieving widow, no abandoned husband, no shadow beneath the pear tree. She had painted the place as though love had existed there without needing tragedy to prove it. Julian sat before the canvas until evening. The following morning, Beatrice entered his study, carrying a list of guests for the proposed engagement announcement. "Lady Cecily's family will expect an answer before they return to London," she said. "They shall have one." Beatrice placed the paper before him. The winter assembly would be suitable. There will be no announcement. Her fingers remained on the list. "You are distressed. That is understandable. I am not distressed. I am refusing. You cannot discard the future of Blackmere because a hired painter has left your house." Julian looked at his mother. "I am discarding nothing. Lady Cecily was never mine to offer. The estate requires stability. The estate has survived poor harvests, war debts, and generations of Harcourt pride. It will survive without using another woman as an instrument." Beatrice's face hardened. "You speak as though I arranged Eleanor's suffering for pleasure. No, you did something worse. You called it duty." She left without taking the guest list. Later that day, Cecily came to the study herself. "I understand I have been released from an engagement that never existed," she said. "I owe you an apology. You owe me honesty, which is considerably rarer." Julian gestured toward a chair, but she remained standing. "Clara is ill," Cecily said. The words stripped the room of air. "What illness? She made me promise not to tell you. And you tell me now, because she is no longer here to protect you from the truth." Julian rose. "How serious?" She coughed blood after the dance. He gripped the edge of the desk. "How long has she known?" "Since summer, I believe. And she intended to complete 12 paintings without telling anyone. She intended to provide for her sister before she could no longer work." Julian closed his eyes. Clara had not come to Blackmere to exploit Eleanor's memory. She had come because time was narrowing around her, and he had used her need for money as evidence against her. "I must go to Bath." Cecily shook her head. "Not yet." He looked at her sharply. "If you follow her only because you have learned she may die, she will believe your affection is pity. Discover the truth first, then decide what you are prepared to sacrifice for it." Julian disliked the advice because it was correct. He remained at Blackmere and opened every account. Beatrice had tried to preserve Mr. Wren found payments made to Vale House under the name of a charitable medical fund. A physician had been instructed to report only to Beatrice. Mr. Bell had received an estate pension, beginning the month Eleanor left and continuing until his death. Most damning of all was a payment to a professional copyist in York, recorded 2 days before the authorization bearing Julian's forged signature had been created. The truth no longer depended upon Clara's memory. It had been purchased, recorded, and hidden within his own household. In Bath, Clara rented a room near St. Catherine's Road. Vale House had become a school for young boys, but the woman who had managed it 8 years earlier still lived above a bookseller's shop near the Abbey. Mrs. Pritchard was nearly 70 and suspicious of every question, until Clara showed her Eleanor's sketchbook. The old woman touched the blue leather with both hands. "She said you would come one day." "Eleanor said that. She said the young artist with the honest face would understand the drawings." Clara sat opposite her beside the narrow window. "Who visited Eleanor on the night the bells rang?" Mrs. Pritchard's expression darkened. "Her companion, Miss Margaret Fenwick. She had been dismissed from Blackmere, but followed the Duchess to Bath." "The woman in the grey cloak?" "Yes." She heard Eleanor's final words. "Is she still alive?" "She entered a religious house near Durham, but she left something with me, Mrs." Pritchard opened a small writing box and removed a sealed letter. The address had been written in Eleanor's failing hand. For Julian, when someone finally loves him enough to tell him the truth. Clara held the envelope, but did not break the seal. It belonged to him. A coughing fit seized her before she could speak again, Mrs. Pritchard called for a physician, though Clara protested until weakness made protest impossible. The doctor examined her in the rented room that evening. When he finished, he folded his spectacles slowly. The journey from Northumberland has worsened your condition. How much time? I cannot give an exact answer. Then give an inexact one. He looked toward the rain-dark window. Months would be hopeful. Clara received the words with less fear than she had expected. Death had followed her quietly for so long that hearing its footsteps clearly almost brought relief. The next morning, a letter arrived from Blackmere. Clara recognized Julian's hand. She waited until night before opening it. I accused you because trusting you required me to admit that I had already begun to need you. That failure was mine, not yours. I will expose what was done to Eleanor, whether you return or not. I will complete the convalescent trust and honor every term of her will without demanding your forgiveness. You owe me no answer. Clara read the letter twice. Then she folded it and placed it beside Eleanor's sealed message. She did not reply. To return would mean allowing Julian to love a woman who might leave him before the spring. To remain away would mean letting him face Eleanor's final truth alone. For 3 days, Clara told herself that silence was mercy. On the 4th, Mrs. Pritchard found her packing the sketchbook and the sealed letter into her case. You are going back. I must give him what belongs to him. The physician warned you against the journey. Clara fastened the case. I have spent too much of my life waiting for a safer time to do what is right. Outside, the carriage stood ready beneath a pale winter sky. Clara looked south toward the road she had traveled in anger. Then she turned north toward Blackmere, carrying Eleanor's final letter, and knowing the journey might consume the strength she had left. Clara reached Blackmere near dusk. By then, snow had begun to gather along the hedges, softening the road and turning the estate into something pale and distant. The journey had left her shaking beneath her cloak. But when the carriage stopped, she refused the footman's offer of assistance. She had not returned to be carried across Julian's threshold like an invalid. The entrance hall was crowded. Carriages filled the front drive, and servants moved between rooms carrying candles, wine, and stacks of legal documents. Voices drifted from the great drawing room beyond the staircase. Mrs. Alden appeared from the corridor and stopped so suddenly that the linen in her arms fell to the floor. Miss Hartwell, Clara managed a smile. I fear my timing is inconvenient. The housekeeper hurried toward her. His Grace has been half mad with worry. Then perhaps he has improved. He was far too controlled before. Mrs. Alden's eyes filled, but she did not laugh. What is happening? The Dowager Duchess called a family council. Lady Cecily's mother, Lord Vaughan, the trustees, and Mr. Wren are all present. Her Grace intends to announce the engagement tonight. There is no engagement. That has not prevented her before. Clara tightened her grip on the leather case. Take me to them. You should rest first. I have rested through half of England. Mrs. Alden understood argument would be useless. She led Clara toward the drawing room. The doors stood open. Beatrice occupied the place nearest the fire, dressed in dark blue silk and wearing the Harcourt diamonds. Lady Cecily sat beside her mother, with visible impatience. Mr. Wren stood near a table covered in ledgers and sealed papers. Julian faced them all from the opposite end of the room. He saw Clara before anyone else did. The change in him was immediate. His shoulders lost their rigid stillness. His eyes moved across her face, her damp cloak, and the case in her hands, as though confirming each detail was real. Clara, every conversation stopped. Beatrice rose. What is she doing here? Clara entered the room, delivering a letter. Julian crossed toward her, but she lifted one hand. Not yet, he stopped. The restraint cost him, but he respected it. Beatrice looked from Clara to Julian. This council concerns the future of Blackmere. A hired artist has no standing here. She has more standing than anyone who forged my name, Julian said. A murmur passed through the room. Mr. Wren opened the ledger found inside the rosewood chest. We have verified payments to a professional copyist in York, he said. We have also confirmed that the former secretary, Mr. Bell, received compensation from the private accounts of the Dowager Duchess, beginning immediately after the late Duchess departed. Beatrice's face remained composed. Payments prove nothing. Bell managed personal matters for this family. They prove concealment, Julian said. The authorization removing Eleanor from Blackmere was forged. Beatrice turned toward the assembled relatives. My son is grieving again. This woman has encouraged him to interpret old household accounts as a conspiracy. Clara placed her case on the table. I brought a witness from Bath. The door opened behind her. Mrs. Pritchard entered with the assistance of a servant. Beside her stood a woman in the plain grey dress of a religious sister. The silver cross at her throat caught the firelight. Clara recognized her at once. The woman who heard the bells, she whispered. Sister Margaret Fenwick bowed her head. I served Duchess Eleanor until I was dismissed by her grace. Every eye turned toward Beatrice. Margaret continued. I followed the Duchess to Bath. On the night she died, she asked that her final letter be given only to someone who had not profited from her silence. Beatrice's control faltered. You were dismissed for disobedience. I was dismissed because I refused to tell the Duchess that her husband no longer loved her. Clara removed Eleanor's sealed letter from the case. Julian looked at it but did not reach for it. Open it, Clara said. His hands were steady until he broke the seal. The room remained silent while he read. Clara watched his face rather than the page. Grief passed through him slowly, followed by something gentler and more painful. What does it say? Beatrice demanded. Julian lowered the letter. She wrote that she never blamed me for failing to find her. She blamed the pride that made us trust messengers more than each other. His voice roughened, but he continued. She asked that the garden become a place for women sent away, because their illness embarrassed their families. She asked that Clara complete the paintings, because Clara treated her as a person when the Harcourt family treated her as a problem. Beatrice's hands tightened. She could not provide an heir. The newspapers were beginning to question her absence. Every season she remained, Duchess weakened Julian's position. Lady Cecily rose. So you destroyed her marriage. I preserved this family. You preserved its name, Julian said, not its honor. Beatrice looked at her son with something close to desperation. I did what your father would have required. My father is dead, and without an heir, this title may pass to a distant cousin who will sell half the estate. Then let it. The words stunned the room. Julian moved to the table and placed a prepared document beside Eleanor's letter. I have transferred the garden, the dower house, and the income from the Western farms into an independent charitable trust. Blackmere will lose a third of its annual revenue. Beatrice stared at him. You would diminish your inheritance for a dead woman, for the living women who might otherwise share her fate. He turned toward Clara. The 12 paintings will belong to the trust. They will bear the name of their artist. Clara could not speak. Beatrice looked around the room, perhaps searching for support, but even her closest relatives avoided her eyes. At last she said, "And what of Lady Cecily?" Cecily stepped forward. "I would sooner marry the gardener than a man who had been ordered to choose me." Her mother gasped. Julian faced the family trustees. There will be no engagement, no alliance purchased with a woman's obedience. Anyone who finds that decision unacceptable may leave Blackmere tonight. No one moved. The power in the room had shifted, not because Julian had raised his voice, but because he had surrendered the very advantages everyone expected him to protect. Clara understood then that he had not waited for her return to tell the truth. He had chosen it without any promise that she would forgive him. Julian came toward her. I meant what I wrote, he said quietly. You owe me nothing. That may be the first generous sentence you have ever spoken without disguising it as an order. A faint, broken smile touched his face. Then the room tilted. Clara reached for the table, but her hand found only air. Julian caught her before she struck the floor. Her leather case fell open. Sketches scattered across the carpet, followed by the white handkerchief she had hidden inside. A dark red stain marked its center. Julian saw it. His expression changed from relief to terror. "Clara?" She tried to answer, but pain tightened through her chest. His arms closed around her as he called for the physician. The last thing Clara saw before darkness took her was Eleanor's final letter lying open beneath the Harcourt diamonds, while Julian held her as though love alone could prevent another woman from leaving him. Clara woke to the sound of rain against the windows. For several moments, she did not know where she was. The room was unfamiliar, the curtains drawn against daylight, the fire low in the grate. Then she felt the weight of someone's hand around hers. Julian sat beside the bed. He had removed his coat and cravat. His hair had fallen forward, and exhaustion had stripped every trace of ceremony from his face. "You frightened the entire household," he said. His voice was quiet, but the hand holding hers trembled. Clara tried to sit. Pain tightened across her chest. "Do not." That sounded very much like an order. It was a plea poorly expressed. She looked toward the door. "How long?" 2 days, and the physician, Julian's gaze shifted away. "That's serious. He believes the journey worsened your condition." "I had already reached that conclusion. You knew." Clara did not answer. His hand released hers. The loss of warmth felt immediate. "You knew before you came to Blackmere?" "Yes." "How long?" "Since June." Julian stood and walked toward the window. The movement carried more anguish than anger. "You allowed me to question your motives while you were trying to finish work before you could no longer hold a brush. I did not require your pity." "Pity," he turned. "You believe this is pity. I believe grief is capable of disguising itself as many noble emotions." His face tightened. "You think I do not know the difference between losing Eleanor and losing you. You have not lost me yet, and you intended to prevent it by leaving without telling me. I intended to spare you. Do not call abandonment mercy." The words struck hard enough that Clara looked away. Julian returned to the bedside, but he did not touch her. "For 7 years, I lived with the belief that Eleanor chose silence. Now I learn that you planned the same punishment. I am not Eleanor. You are the woman who taught me silence could be a lie and then used it against me." Clara's eyes filled, though she refused to let the tears fall. "What would you have had me do?" she asked. "Stand before you and say, 'Love me quickly, your grace, because I may not remain long enough for spring'? I would have had you trust me with the choice. And if you chose me because death made the decision urgent, then you could have refused me. You speak as though refusal would not break us both." Julian's expression softened. "We are already broken," the truth settled between them. Clara closed her eyes. "When Eleanor died, you shut every door around her memory. I could not bear to become another locked room in this house." Julian knelt beside the bed. "You will not. You cannot promise that. I can promise what I will do with grief. No one knows what grief will make of them. I know what it made of me before." He took her hand again. "I mistook suffering for loyalty. I believed the depth of my pain proved the depth of my love. It did not. It proved only that I was afraid to continue." Clara looked at him. His eyes were red from sleeplessness. "I loved Eleanor," he said. "I loved the girl who argued with my father at dinner and planted white roses where he wanted yew trees. I loved the wife who believed duty could be made gentle." Clara's throat tightened, but she let him continue. "I love you differently." He spoke the words without performance, without the authority of a duke. "You do not belong to my youth. You are not part of the life stolen from me. You are the woman who entered the ruin I had preserved and told me it was incomplete." A tear escaped down Clara's cheek. Julian wiped it away with his thumb. I love that you challenge me when obedience would be safer. I love that you see motive where I see guilt. I love that you paint what existed, what remains, and what might still become possible. Julian, I am not asking you to live because I command it. I am asking you not to leave before allowing me to stand beside you. She turned her face into his palm. I am afraid, so am I. I may have weeks. Then I ask for the weeks, and afterward, I grieve, I continue. I keep every promise you require of me. She studied him. Do not preserve my room. I will not. Do not close the glass house. I will keep it open. Do not tell people I was gentler than I am. A broken laugh escaped him. That would be an impossible deception. Do not make my death the most important thing about my life. Julian bowed his forehead against her hand. I swear it. Silence followed, no longer empty, but full of all they had not dared to choose. When Julian raised his head, he removed a folded document from the table beside the bed. What is that? Provision for Lydia. A house and an independent income, placed in her name whether you accept me or not. Accept you? A marriage settlement. Clara stared at him. You have arranged a proposal with your solicitor. I have been accused of poor preparation before. You have also been accused of making invitations sound like orders. Then I shall attempt this properly. He rose, though his hand remained around hers. Clara Hartwell, I cannot promise you years. I cannot promise that love will make what comes next less painful. I can promise that no decision about your life will be made without you again. His voice faltered, but he did not look away. Marry me. Not because you are ill. Not because Eleanor brought you here. Not because Blackmere requires a duchess. Marry me because whatever time remains is ours to choose. Clara wept then. Not because the proposal offered rescue. There was no rescue. Not because a title could alter what waited inside her body. It could not. She wept because Julian offered love, without pretending it possessed power over death. If I say yes, she whispered, I keep ownership of the paintings, all of them, and the trust remains independent of the estate. Yes, Lydia chooses her own future. Yes, and I finish the garden. If you have the strength, I will decide that. A faint smile touched his face. Naturally, Clara tightened her fingers around his. Yes, Julian closed his eyes. For one moment, relief transformed him into the man he might have been, before grief taught him to conceal every feeling. He leaned forward and kissed her gently. There was no desperation in it, no attempt to claim a future they did not possess. It was a promise made only for the present. They were married 4 days later in the estate chapel. Snow rested along the narrow windows. Mrs. Alden stood beside Lydia, who had arrived from London weeping, scolding and refusing to leave Clara's side. Lady Cecily served as witness, while Mr. Wren carried the documents that ensured every promise had been made lawful. Beatrice did not attend. Clara wore no jewels except the blue enamel brooch Eleanor had given her in Bath. When Julian saw it, grief moved across his face, followed by acceptance. The past stood with them, but it did not stand between them. After the vows, Sister Margaret gave Julian the final page from Eleanor's letter. He read it aloud only to Clara. The young woman I drew is not to replace me. No woman should be asked to live as another woman's shadow. I chose her because she looked at me without seeing a duchess, a failure, or a dying woman. She saw a life that still possessed meaning. If she ever comes to Blackmere, listen when she tells you to open the gates. Clara rested her head against Julian's shoulder. Eleanor had intended truth. She had not intended love. That belonged to Clara and Julian alone. Later, while the others gathered for a quiet meal, Clara led him into the garden. Snow covered the paths, but the revived rose near the stone seat remained wrapped against the cold. She stopped beneath the pear tree from Eleanor's sketch. Her breathing had become shallow. Julian placed his coat around her shoulders. You should be inside. I have one painting left. The physician said, I did not marry you so that you could become obedient to physicians. He looked at her with helpless affection. Clara raised her eyes toward the bare branches. In her mind, they were already white with blossom. "I think," she said, "I have enough strength left to finish one final painting." Spring came slowly to Blackmere. For weeks the garden remained caught between frost and rain. Then, almost overnight, green returned to the branches. White roses opened along the repaired arches, and the pear tree beside the stone seat filled with blossoms, so pale they seemed to hold the morning light. Clara lived long enough to see them. Her final canvas stood inside the glasshouse, larger than the 11 paintings before it. She could no longer remain at the easel for more than an hour, and some days she lacked the strength to lift a brush at all. Julian never urged her to finish. He prepared her paints, carried the canvas into better light, and sat nearby with Eleanor's letters while Clara worked. When her hand trembled, he waited. When she grew angry at her weakness, he did not comfort her with promises neither of them believed. He simply remained. The painting was unlike the others. At its center stood the open garden gate. Beyond it, the path divided around the fountain. One direction led toward Eleanor's white roses. The other passed beneath the pear tree, where Clara had first understood that memory need not become a prison. 2 women appeared in the painting, though neither face was fully shown. One stood near the roses, dressed in the pale blue Clara remembered from Bath. The other sat beneath the pear tree, with a sketchbook upon her lap. Between them walked a man carrying no title, no family ring, and no visible burden except the knowledge that he had loved them both. "You have made me look lonely," Julian said when she allowed him to see it. "You were lonely. I am standing between 2 women. You are walking forward." He studied the open gate. "And where does the path lead?" "Beyond the canvas." That is an artist's way of admitting she does not know. It is an artist's way of permitting you a future. Clara signed her full name in the lower corner. Clara Hartwell. The brush slipped from her fingers. Julian caught it before it struck the floor. "Finished?" he asked. She looked at the painting for a long time. Yes, the 12 canvases were placed in the restored gallery the following week. Mr. Wren completed the transfer of the garden and dower house into Eleanor's charitable trust. Lydia was appointed director of the small school that would teach drawing and botanical illustration to women who could not afford private instruction. Clara insisted that the first students be admitted before summer. "People always delay kindness until the building is perfect," she told Julian. "The women who need it are not waiting inside perfect lives." Beatrice left Blackmere shortly after the family council. She moved to a smaller estate in Yorkshire, where she lived with the consequences of the name she had tried to protect. She was not prosecuted. Julian refused to turn Eleanor's suffering into public entertainment for the scandal sheets, but he removed his mother from every trust, household account, and decision concerning Blackmere. Months later, a legal document arrived transferring the remainder of Beatrice's private fortune to the convalescent home. There was no apology attached. Clara accepted the gift. "Remorse does not always know how to speak," she said. Julian was less forgiving. She waited until nothing remained to lose. Then perhaps that is when pride finally becomes honest. By the end of May, Clara could no longer walk to the garden without assistance. On the first warm morning of June, she asked Julian to carry her outside. He wrapped her in a light blanket and took her beneath the pear tree. The white petals had begun to fall, drifting across the grass and resting in her hair. Students worked inside the glasshouse. Their voices traveled through the open doors, accompanied by the sound of brushes being washed, and easels moved across the floor. Clara listened. "They are too loud," Julian said. "They are alive." He sat beside her on the stone seat and held her against him. The revived rosebush had produced its first bloom. It was not perfectly white. A thin line of pink marked one petal. "Eleanor would have called it apologetic," Clara whispered. "She would have ordered it removed. You would have argued with her." "I often did. And lost almost always, Clara smiled. Her breathing grew shallower as the sunlight moved across the garden. "Open the outer gate," she said. "It is already open. The road gate." Julian understood. Visitors had once required permission to enter the Blackmere grounds. The estate remained a symbol of distance, wealth and exclusion even after the garden had changed. "Clara, you should rest. You promised to listen when I told you to open the gates." He closed his eyes, then he called for the steward. Before noon, the iron gates at the end of the long drive were opened. No announcement was made, no Harcourt crest was removed. The barrier simply ceased to exist. Clara watched from beneath the pear tree as the first village carriage entered without being stopped. "That is better," she said. Julian held her hand. "You must not make this moment more beautiful than it is," she whispered. "I would not dare argue with the artist. I am dying, yes, and you will be alone for a time, but not forever." He pressed her fingers to his lips. "I will continue." Clara looked toward the glass house, where Lydia stood in the doorway trying not to weep. Lady Cecily was beside her. Holding a stack of enrollment papers, Mrs. Alden had placed Eleanor's blue sketchbook on a table between the 1st and 12th paintings. The garden no longer belonged only to the dead. Clara rested her head against Julian's chest. "I was afraid you loved my face because she drew it. I loved you because you refused to let me decide what your face meant." A tear moved down her cheek. "Do you think Eleanor knew that I would love you?" "Yes, no." Clara smiled faintly. "Good." Her eyes closed. Julian felt the final breath leave her as quietly as a page turning. He did not call her name as though authority might bring her back. He did not order the servants to close the gates or cover the paintings. He remained beneath the pear tree until the falling blossoms covered the path around them. 1 year later, the Blackmere School and Convalescent Garden housed 23 women. Some came to recover from illness. Others came because their families had hidden them, dismissed them, or decided their ambitions were inconvenient. They learned to paint, to read accounts, and to earn money beneath their own names. Lydia kept Clara's final brush above the office door. Cecily became the trust's most relentless patron and never married the gardener, though she frequently reminded Julian that she had once considered it. Julian continued to live at Blackmere. He grieved Clara without sealing her rooms. Her unfinished sketches remained on the tables. Her coats hung beside the garden entrance. Her name appeared upon every painting, exactly as she had written it. Some mornings, the loss was bearable. On others, he stood beneath the pear tree and understood how easily sorrow could persuade a person to stop moving. Whenever that happened, he walked to the gallery. Eleanor's blue sketchbook rested open beside Clara's final painting. On one page was the portrait drawn 8 years before Clara came to Blackmere, a young woman with an honest face, looking forward as though her life could still change. Across from it stood the painted garden with its open gate. One woman had sent the truth home, the other had taught Julian how to survive it. A breeze entered through the open windows and turned the sketchbook to its final page. There, beneath Eleanor's drawing of Clara smiling, were 6 words Julian had never noticed before. "Let her be loved while she lives." Julian touched the faded line. Then he stepped away from the dead and walked outside, where voices filled the garden, and the gates of Blackmere remained open. Thank you for staying with Clara and Julian through this story of love, grief, and the courage to continue after loss. Do you believe loving again betrays the person we have lost? Or can new love become another way of honoring what they taught us? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and join us for more cinematic Regency romances about hidden truths, difficult sacrifices, and love that changes even the most guarded hearts.